"Take someone healthy instead," she whispered, eyes wide with innocence and resignation. She had no idea the man kneeling before her was a millionaire, or that he had already made up his mind to change her life forever. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The city skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elijah Price's penthouse office, but he barely noticed it anymore. The sunset painted the sky in shades of burnt orange and lavender, casting long shadows across the glass conference table. His assistant had left hours ago. The office was silent, save for the soft hum of air conditioning and the occasional buzz of his phone, ignored. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers tented under his chin, staring at the framed photo on his desk. It was a picture of him at a charity gala, arm around the mayor, both men smiling in their tuxedos. An image of success. Yet behind that glass pane, Elijah saw the same thing he saw every time. Nothing that really mattered. His phone buzzed again. This time, he picked it up and glanced at the screen. Subject: volunteer opportunity, children's home program, 5 days. He opened it out of boredom, expecting another donation pitch. But it wasn't that. It was an actual invitation to volunteer at a local orphanage. Help with the kids, spend time with them, bring joy. 5 days. That's all they were asking. No big gala, no press, no cameras. Just time. He read it twice, then clicked the link to sign up. No assistant. No overthinking. He just did it. 2 days later, Elijah stepped out of his black sedan, looking utterly out of place in his tailored coat and polished shoes in front of St. Mary's Home for Children. The brick building was worn but tidy, with faded murals of rainbows and stick-figure children dancing across the outer wall. Inside, laughter echoed faintly. "Mr. Price," a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a clipboard approached him. "We're honored to have you. I'm Sister Helena. Thank you for volunteering." Elijah offered a practiced smile. "Please, just Elijah. I'm happy to help." She looked surprised but pleasantly so. Not every day a man like you comes to spend time with children who have nothing. That comment sat with him as she led him inside. The smell of crayons and cafeteria food filled the air. The halls were bright but carried the quiet heaviness of a place too used to waiting. Waiting for parents who never came, for birthdays that passed unnoticed, for normalcy that never arrived. The children, when introduced to him, were polite but hesitant. He knelt to their level, tried to connect. Some warmed up quickly. Others watched from afar. Elijah wasn't a natural with kids, but he was observant. Over the next few hours, he noticed patterns: who played alone, who demanded attention, who avoided eye contact. Every one of them was a story wrapped in small shoulders and quiet hopes. By the end of the first day, something strange had begun to happen. He didn't want to leave. That night, back in his penthouse, the silence was louder than usual. The glass of scotch sat untouched. The city lights no longer impressed him. He found himself thinking about a boy named Miguel who had shown him how to fold paper planes. About the twins who argued over which superhero would win in a fight. And about the tiny girl in the corner who didn't speak at all. She hadn't joined the games, hadn't smiled, hadn't even looked up. But when she thought no one was watching, she tied another child's shoelace, gently wiped a spill on the table, and sat beside a crying toddler just to hold his hand. He didn't know her name yet, but something about her felt familiar. Not in the way of memory, but in the way two silences recognize each other. He turned off the light, unsure why a stranger's quiet presence stayed with him more than all the accolades he'd ever earned. Something was shifting. He didn't know it yet, but so was his life. The second morning at St. Mary's greeted Elijah with the sound of children shouting joyfully across the courtyard. One was pushing another in a plastic tricycle, while others chased bubbles floating in the crisp morning air. Their laughter felt pure, almost too pure for a place built on abandonment and waiting. He stood near the edge of the playground, a steaming paper cup of coffee warming his hands, watching the scene with a quiet sort of reverence. Sister Helena walked up beside him, arms folded. "They find ways to laugh," she said. "Even here. Especially here." Elijah nodded, not taking his eyes off the kids. "It's humbling." "It is. But they all carry their stories. Some heavier than others." His eyes scanned the courtyard. Most of the children were engaged, playing in clumps or clusters. But in the far corner, beneath the low branches of a tree, sat the same little girl from yesterday. She was alone again. A soft, small figure in a pale blue dress that looked one size too big. Her knees drawn to her chest. Watching. Always watching, but never speaking. "Her name's Sarah," Sister Helena said quietly, noticing where his eyes had landed. "Sarah," he repeated under his breath. "She's been here the longest," Helena continued. 7 years old. Came to us at 4. In and out of the hospital her first year. She has a chronic condition, manageable, but not cheap. Families come, ask questions, and once they hear the word treatment, they move on. Elijah felt a tightening in his chest. No one's tried. A few. One got far into the process, but pulled out at the last minute. Said they couldn't take the risk. She's smart enough to understand now. Doesn't say much, but she knows when she's being passed over. As they spoke, Sarah slowly stood up, brushed herself off, and walked toward a small boy struggling with a puzzle on a nearby bench. She didn't say a word, just sat beside him, studied the pieces, and gently rotated one into place. The boy beamed. She smiled faintly, then returned to silence. "She helps the younger kids," Helena said. "Protects them like a big sister. That's just who she is." Elijah's throat tightened. "Has she said anything to you? About being adopted?" "She asked once if she could just stay here forever," Helena said softly. "Said the world outside didn't seem to want her." Elijah was quiet for a long moment. Then, setting his coffee down, he walked toward the children. He didn't approach Sarah right away. He didn't want to startle her or make her feel like she was being studied. Instead, he knelt beside the boy she'd helped and joined in their puzzle. His fingers worked slowly, carefully. Sarah didn't move, but her eyes flicked toward him, curious. After a few minutes, she placed another piece beside his hand, not speaking, just sharing the moment. He looked at her gently. "You're good at this." She gave a tiny shrug. "I'm Elijah," he said, offering his name like a gift rather than a demand. "I know," she whispered, barely audible. He smiled. "Well, it's nice to officially meet you." She glanced at him briefly, then back at the puzzle. "You won't stay long," she said, her voice flat. "They never do." He felt that like a punch in the gut. "I might surprise you," he said softly. That earned him a sideways look. Skeptical. Wary. But not unkind. The rest of the day passed with quiet observations and shared moments. Sarah never initiated conversation, but she was always nearby, brushing doll hair with one hand and holding a tissue for a crying toddler in the other. Her presence was calm, grounded, older than her years. That evening, Elijah lingered in the hallway as the children were led to dinner. Sister Helena approached again. "You spent some time with her." He nodded. "There's something about her." Helena smiled gently. "We see it every day. Most just don't take the time to notice." Elijah stared at the closed door she had walked through. "How can people not?" "They're afraid," Helena said. "Afraid of the cost. Afraid of the unknown. Afraid of what it means to choose someone who isn't easy." Elijah said nothing, but deep in his heart, something began to settle. A quiet knowing. He hadn't come looking for a child. He hadn't come expecting anything, really. But Sarah had already started to fill the silence he'd carried for years. Not with noise, but with presence. And that, he realized, was exactly what he'd been missing. The 5th day arrived with overcast skies and a quiet tension that Elijah couldn't shake. He'd spent every moment he could at the orphanage that week, and somehow, the cold marble corridors of his penthouse had begun to feel foreign. The warmth of St. Mary's, the chaos, the noise, the fragile, fierce little hearts, had settled into him like sunlight through a window he hadn't realized had been closed. But it was Sarah who stayed with him most. She'd begun sitting closer. not speaking much, but letting him read to her. She'd even drawn a picture and, without words, slipped it onto his lap. 3 stick figures holding hands. A man, a girl, and a smaller figure. A dog, maybe? Or a child. He hadn't asked. He just kept it folded in his pocket. He entered the building that morning with something heavier than his coat weighing on his shoulders. A decision had been blooming in him slowly, but now it was clear. He didn't want to leave without her. Inside, the children were gathered in the common room for group time. Crayons rolled across tables, hands reached for juice boxes, and chairs scraped on the floor as volunteers and kids laughed in mismatched harmony. Sarah was at the far end, quietly stringing beads onto a bracelet. Her small fingers worked with methodical care, threading color after color. Elijah knelt beside her. "That's beautiful," he said. She didn't look up. "It's for Rosie. She cries when her brother visits, and then leaves again." Elijah nodded. "You take care of everyone." She shrugged. "They're little." He watched her for a long moment. "Who takes care of you?" She paused, threading another bead. "Nobody needs to." He exhaled slowly. "I think I'd like to try." That made her look up. Her eyes were deep brown, serious in a way that no child's should be. For a moment, she studied his face like she didn't believe him, like she'd heard too many kind words with no weight behind them. "I spoke to Sister Helena," he said gently. "I want to adopt you." She blinked. Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. And then, in a voice so soft it trembled, she said, "Why?" The question nearly broke him. It wasn't defiant, it was bewildered. Like no one had ever told her she was wanted for simply existing. He knelt lower, eye level now. "Because I see you, Sarah. And I don't want to leave without you." She looked away. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she whispered, "Take someone healthy instead." The words stabbed through the air. Elijah's heart clenched. He sat on the floor beside her, not as a man in a suit or a millionaire or a volunteer, just a human being trying to reach another. "Sarah," he said softly, "you are not broken. You are not less. You are not a burden." She didn't answer. "I know people have made you feel that way," he continued. "I know they've walked past you or looked away when they heard the word sick. But I'm not going anywhere. I've already chosen you." A long moment passed. Then she turned her face to his. Not with hope, not yet, but with raw confusion. "No one chooses me," she whispered. He reached out slowly, offering his hand, but not forcing it. "I do." Sarah stared at his palm, trembling. She didn't take it. Not then. But she didn't run away either. Later that evening, after the other volunteers had left, Elijah stayed behind in Sister Helena's office. Paperwork filled the table between them. Forms, evaluations, medical records. He signed every one without hesitation. "She'll need ongoing care," Helena reminded him. "There will be challenges. Days that feel long. Nights that feel longer." Elijah looked out the small window to the playground beyond. Sarah sat on the swing, not moving, just swaying slightly, watching the sky. "I've lived a long time surrounded by everything money can buy," he said. "And I've never been as sure of anything as I am of this." Helena smiled. "She's going to test you." "I hope so," he said quietly. "She deserves to know she's safe to do that." That night, as he prepared to leave, Sarah met him at the front steps. She held something small in her hand, a bracelet. The beads were misshapen, mismatched, and perfect. She held it out. "For you," she murmured. He took it carefully, sliding it over his wrist, the plastic tight but fitting. "Thank you," he said. "I'll keep it always." She looked up at him again. Her voice was still quiet, but no longer hollow. "You can take me," she said. Then she slipped her small hand into his. And didn't let go. The first night in her new home was quieter than any night Sarah had known. Elijah watched her as she stepped hesitantly into the penthouse, a space so different from the orphanage it might as well have been on another planet. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the living room, revealing a dazzling view of the city glittering beneath the night sky. Plush rugs muffled their footsteps. The walls were lined with artwork and books, the air lightly scented with fresh eucalyptus from a nearby diffuser. It was beautiful. It was quiet. It was unfamiliar. Sarah didn't say anything. She held tightly to her small suitcase, a faded pink thing with a single broken wheel, and looked around like she was preparing for someone to tell her it was a mistake. Elijah knelt beside her, not touching, just letting his presence fill the space. "This is home now," he said gently. She looked up at him. "For how long?" His chest tightened. "For as long as you want it to be." She didn't respond, but she didn't let go of the suitcase either. The first few weeks were an adjustment, not just for Sarah, but for Elijah too. He learned quickly that trust didn't arrive just because papers were signed or promises were made. Sarah didn't like loud noises. She flinched when someone knocked too hard or a phone rang too suddenly. She slept with the door open and the light on in the hallway. She barely spoke at dinner, often pushing her food around without eating much. But she was watching, always watching. So Elijah stopped trying to fill the silences. He didn't hover. He simply showed up every day. He packed her lunch with handwritten notes tucked inside. He picked her up from school himself, no matter how busy his schedule. He sat on the floor with her while she drew, asking about her art but never pushing. One night, he found her sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, staring out the window. "Do you miss it?" she asked. He looked up from the book he was pretending to read. "Miss what?" "The other place. The quiet. Before me." Elijah set the book down and walked over, sitting beside her. "No," he said. "Before you was the loneliest place I've ever been." Sarah didn't respond. But a few minutes later, she leaned into his side just barely, her small shoulder brushing his. He didn't move, didn't react. But his heart swelled. It was the first time she touched him on her own. Her medical care began immediately. Specialists. Tests. Treatment plans. Elijah had insisted on the best, and while the doctors were gentle, the process was exhausting. One morning, after a long appointment, Sarah sat in the back seat of the car, her head resting against the window. "I don't want to be the reason you're tired," she said softly. Elijah glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You're not the reason I'm tired," he said. "You'd have an easier life without me." He pulled over. Turning around in his seat, he looked her in the eyes. "I didn't choose easy, Sarah. I chose you." She blinked, lips trembling. "Why?" He smiled, quiet and sure. "Because you're the bravest person I've ever met. And I think maybe you're the one saving me." The seasons changed. Winter turned to spring. And something began to shift in their home. Sarah's laughter, rare and fleeting before, started to come in bursts. She danced in the kitchen when Elijah played music. She learned how to bake cookies and left sticky fingerprints on the counters. She invited Elijah to her school's family day. When he showed up in a ridiculous paper crown she made for him in class, she didn't hide from him. She ran straight into his arms. She started sleeping with the door closed. She began calling him Dad. The first time, it slipped out by accident. She had spilled juice on the carpet and cried, "Dad, I'm sorry," before realizing what she'd said. She froze, wide-eyed. Elijah knelt down beside her, gently taking the cup from her shaking hands. "Don't be sorry," he whispered. "Not about the juice. And definitely not about that word." Sarah stared at him, uncertain. "You don't mind?" His voice cracked. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever called me." By the end of that first year, their home felt less like a museum and more like a life. The walls had finger paintings in mismatched frames. Her shoes sat beside his at the front door. Her voice echoed through the hallways. Her scent, strawberry shampoo and vanilla bubble bath, lingered in the air. Elijah had never imagined his life like this. But now, he couldn't imagine it any other way. One night, while tucking her into bed, Sarah looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "You didn't listen," she mumbled. He brushed her hair gently off her forehead. "What do you mean?" "I told you to take someone healthy instead." He smiled, his hand still resting lightly on her head. "And I told you. I was looking for you." Sarah reached out and took his hand. And this time, she didn't let go either. It started the way most beautiful things do, quietly. Elijah had never been one to chase attention, and after adopting Sarah, his public image faded even further from his mind. Business still mattered. He was, after all, responsible for hundreds of employees, but for the first time in years, his purpose wasn't found in mergers or meetings. It was found in the little girl who now painted rainbows on his walls and fell asleep with her hand curled around his finger. But life, with all its surprises, had more in store. It began on a rainy Saturday. Sarah had been invited to a classmate's birthday party at a small indoor gym across town. Elijah brought her, expecting to stay off to the side, answering work emails on his phone. He didn't expect the pediatric nurse running the first aid booth to catch his eye, or to make him laugh within minutes of speaking. "Father of the one in the Wonder Woman cape?" she asked, glancing at Sarah as she scaled a padded climbing wall. Elijah grinned. "Guilty. And deeply impressed. I couldn't do that even on my best day." She offered him a knowing smile. "You'd be surprised what kids can do when someone believes in them." There was something in the way she said it, a softness, but with steel beneath it. "I'm Anita," she added, extending a hand. "Elijah." Their hands met and lingered, just a moment longer than necessary. They didn't speak again until 2 weeks later, when they ran into each other at a school fundraiser. Anita was helping organize the book fair. Sarah tugged Elijah's sleeve and pointed. "That's the nurse from the party," she whispered. "Do you want to say hi?" She hesitated, then nodded. Anita's face lit up when she saw them. "Well, if it isn't Wonder Woman and her sidekick," she teased, crouching to meet Sarah's eyes. Sarah didn't speak. She rarely did with new people, but she smiled. That was more than enough for Anita. "I'm glad you came," she said, rising to meet Elijah's gaze. "Need any help finding the good books?" "Actually," Elijah replied, "I could use help finding any books. Sarah's already read more than I have this year." Anita laughed. "Then we better get started." It wasn't love at first sight. Not exactly. But it was something better, real recognition. Their friendship unfolded like a well-worn novel, one page at a time. Coffee after school drop-offs. Helping out at the same charity events. A shared understanding of what it meant to care deeply, even when life hadn't always been kind. Anita didn't ask about his wealth, and Elijah didn't flaunt it. She was the kind of woman who found joy in simple things. Planting herbs on her balcony, reading on rainy afternoons, volunteering at the shelter on Sundays. She asked questions that mattered. She listened. She noticed when Elijah was tired and made him laugh instead of asking why. And she loved Sarah, not with the awkward hesitance of someone trying to win her over, but with a natural, steady tenderness. She never tried to fix Sarah. She simply made space for her. By the time Elijah realized he wanted her to stay, she already felt like part of their rhythm. One evening, as they watched Sarah dance barefoot around the living room, Anita leaned her head on Elijah's shoulder. "She's blooming," she whispered. "She's brave," Elijah said. "She just needed somewhere safe enough to try." Anita smiled. "And you gave her that." He looked down at her, studying the way the lamplight caught the curve of her cheek. "I'd like to give her more." Anita tilted her head. "What do you mean?" I'd like her to have us." Her eyes softened. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I don't know exactly how to say it," he admitted. "But I think about you here. I think about us. Not just dating. Not just visiting. But here. In this home. With her. And maybe one day with more." Anita didn't answer right away. She reached for his hand. "I think about that too," she said. They married quietly, on a sunlit afternoon in the backyard, surrounded by people who actually mattered. Sarah was the flower girl, her dress a soft blue to match Elijah's tie. She held Anita's hand just before the ceremony, looked up and said, "Do I call you Mom now?" Anita knelt, tears already in her eyes. "You can call me anything you want. But if you ever feel ready to call me Mom, I would love that more than anything." Sarah didn't say anything. But during the vows, she stood between them, holding both their hands. And when they kissed, she smiled and whispered, "Okay, Mom." Anita wept openly. So did Elijah. A year later, they welcomed a baby boy. Noah. Sarah visited the hospital room wearing a shirt that said, big sister in charge. She approached the tiny bundle swaddled in Anita's arms with the solemn responsibility of a knight guarding a treasure. Elijah lifted her up gently so she could see better. "He's so small," she said. "So were you," Anita whispered. Sarah reached out, her fingers brushing Noah's cheek. "He's lucky." Elijah kissed the top of her head. "We all are." Later that night, as the four of them sat quietly in the hospital room, Noah asleep, Anita resting, Elijah holding Sarah close, something clicked into place. Not with ceremony or grand announcements, just with peace. Sarah looked up at Elijah. "I have a family now," she said simply. He kissed her forehead. "Yes," he whispered. "You do." And for the first time in her life, she believed it completely. The day they brought Noah home, Sarah stood at the front door with a handmade sign that said, "Welcome baby brother," in crooked, colorful letters. Glitter clung to the paper, and her fingers were still smudged with glue and marker as she bounced nervously from foot to foot, checking the window every few minutes. The minute Elijah's car pulled into the driveway, she ran out to meet them, the sign flapping wildly in the wind behind her like a flag of victory. Anita stepped out carefully, cradling Noah in her arms. Sarah approached like she was entering a cathedral, slowly, reverently, her voice no louder than a breath. "Can I hold him?" Anita smiled, her eyes still tired but glowing with something deeper than joy. "Let's go inside first, and then we'll make sure he gets to meet his big sister properly." In the living room, Elijah guided Sarah onto the couch and piled pillows around her like she was royalty. She sat up straight, hands in her lap, vibrating with anticipation. Anita carefully placed Noah into her arms. Sarah froze. He was warm. So warm. And smaller than she imagined, all soft skin and sleepy sounds. His eyes fluttered open just long enough to lock with hers. Sarah gasped. "He looked at me." Anita sat beside her. "He knows your voice. He heard you reading all those bedtime stories out loud to my belly." Elijah smiled from the doorway, phone in hand, capturing the moment with quiet awe. Sarah glanced down at her brother again. "He's real." Elijah nodded. "And he's yours too." Sarah didn't say anything, but she bent her head, resting her cheek gently against his. And that's when Noah made a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and settled into her arms like he belonged there. The early days were a blur of bottle feeds, midnight cries, diaper changes, and exhaustion. But amidst the chaos, something beautiful unfolded. Sarah was no longer the smallest voice in the house. And she didn't resent it, not even for a second. She became Noah's protector, entertainer, and occasional translator, confidently explaining every squeak or cry like an expert. "He's hungry. He doesn't like that toy. He wants you to sing, not talk." She made him laugh before anyone else could. Her silly faces, her dancing sock puppets, her whispered secrets, they were magic to him. Elijah would often wake in the middle of the night, not to Noah's cries, but to the sound of Sarah's soft voice in the nursery, already rocking him gently in the chair before anyone else had stirred. "I've got him," she'd whisper. And she did. But motherhood and fatherhood with two children, especially with such different needs, wasn't easy. Elijah and Anita learned to pass Noah like a relay baton during long nights, and Elijah found himself fielding business calls with a baby in one arm and a sippy cup in the other. And yet, even in the fatigue, there was a quiet joy. The joy of watching Sarah grow into herself. She began to speak more at school. Not loud, not boastful, but sure. She made friends, real ones, and invited them over for movie nights where she introduced Noah as "my baby brother" with unmistakable pride. She began drawing families, always 4 people now, never 3. And for the first time, she let Elijah hang one of her drawings on the fridge. One evening, a few months after Noah's birth, Elijah found Sarah sitting at the edge of the crib, gently humming. Noah was asleep, his fingers wrapped around one of hers. Elijah leaned against the doorframe. "You're really good at that," he said quietly. Sarah didn't turn around. He had a bad dream. I could tell. Elijah stepped inside and sat beside her on the floor. "You were right," she said suddenly. "About what?" Back then, when you said you weren't looking for perfect. Just me. Elijah smiled softly. I meant it. She nodded. I know now, but I didn't believe it then. They sat in silence for a while, the room dim, filled with the sound of Noah's breathing. Then Sarah asked, Do you think I'll always be scared sometimes? Elijah considered his answer before speaking. Maybe, but being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. I was scared when he was born, she admitted. I thought you might not need me anymore. He turned to her, heart aching. Sarah, he said gently, you are the reason I know how to love this way. You taught me how. Nothing could ever take your place. She leaned into him then, resting her head on his side. I just didn't want to be forgotten. Elijah kissed her forehead. You were my beginning, Sarah. You'll always be part of everything that comes next. Anita peeked in a few minutes later and saw the two of them there, leaning against each other beside Noah's crib. She didn't say a word. She just smiled, turned off the hallway light, and let them stay like that, together in the quiet, where the heart of their family had always been. The auditorium was packed, but all Elijah could see was her. Sarah stood on stage in her deep blue graduation gown, her cap sitting slightly crooked atop her long, dark hair. The tassel swayed as she stepped forward, clutching a crumpled paper in her hand. A speech she'd rewritten at least a dozen times, each version more vulnerable than the last. Anita squeezed Elijah's hand beside him. On his other side, Noah bounced in his seat, dressed in a little button-down shirt and navy suspenders, his legs too short to touch the floor. Is she nervous? He whispered. Elijah smiled. Maybe. But she's ready. The auditorium dimmed slightly, and the microphone squeaked as Sarah stepped up to the podium. For a moment, she stood completely still, staring out at the sea of faces, friends, teachers, parents. Her eyes found Elijah and Anita. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The quiet strength on her face said everything. She unfolded the paper. Then she began. When I was 4 years old, I was placed in an orphanage. I don't remember the day I arrived, but I remember the feeling. I remember the quiet, the kind that hums in your ears. I remember the way adults looked at me, like they wanted to help but didn't know how. I remember being told I was sick, that I'd be expensive. I remember learning not to expect anything, not gifts, not attention, not love. The room was completely still. Sarah paused and took a breath. One day, a man came to volunteer. I didn't speak to him at first. I thought he'd be like the rest, that he'd come and go and forget me. But he saw me, not the sick girl, not the quiet one, just me. And when he asked if he could adopt me, I told him, take someone healthy instead. There was a soft, audible gasp from somewhere in the audience. Elijah stared up at her, his throat tight, his eyes already burning. Sarah looked down at the paper, smiled faintly, then folded it and set it aside. She didn't need it anymore. Her voice, when she spoke next, was clear and steady, not loud but strong enough to fill the room. He didn't take someone else. He took me. He gave me a home, and eventually a mother too, who loved me as if she had always known me. And then came a baby brother who called me his favorite person before he could even say my full name. I wasn't adopted into a house, that I was adopted into a family. And with them, I learned that I am not a burden, that I am not broken, that I am not forgotten. She paused, scanning the room. Her voice softened. And if there's anyone out there who feels like I once did, unseen, unwanted, unchosen, please know, you are not invisible. You are not unworthy. You are not the exception to love. I thought my story ended the day I was left behind, but it hadn't even started yet. The room erupted in applause, a thunderous, standing ovation that rolled through the hall like a wave. Elijah stood slowly, clapping through his tears. Anita beside him, wiping her face, laughing and crying at the same time. And Noah, standing on his seat now, shouting, "That's my sister." When Sarah came down from the stage, she walked straight into Elijah's arms. He pulled her in tight, no words, just breath and heartbeat and pride. "I meant every word," she whispered into his chest. "I know," he said, his voice thick. "And I heard every one." Anita wrapped her arms around them both, and Noah joined too, not wanting to be left out. They stood there in the middle of the crowd, the four of them, a tangle of arms and warmth and history. Sarah looked up at them, her eyes shining. "I didn't just graduate," she said softly. Elijah brushed her hair from her face. "No," she shook her head. "I arrived." That night, they celebrated with chocolate cake and sparkling cider at home. Sarah wore her graduation gown all evening, her cap tilted even more off-center now, refusing to take it off even while eating. Photos lined the walls, framed memories of a life rebuilt. Sarah's adoption day. Her first Christmas. The day Noah was born. The wedding. Her first soccer game. Her science fair win. Birthday candles and bedtime stories and snow angels in the yard. They had become a story, not perfect but real. Not easy but deeply, beautifully theirs. As the night wound down and the candles flickered low, Sarah sat between Elijah and Anita, her head resting on her mother's shoulder. "Do you ever think about that first day?" she asked. Elijah nodded. "All the time. I almost didn't say yes," she said, eyes distant. "I was so scared." Anita kissed her forehead. "And yet you did. You said yes. Even when it was hard." Sarah smiled. "And so did you." Elijah looked at her, no longer the frail, quiet girl in the orphanage, but a young woman standing on the edge of everything. "We'll keep saying yes," he said. "No matter how far you go." Sarah closed her eyes, a soft contentment washing over her. She had once whispered, "Take someone healthy instead." But now, years later, she was the one holding others up. The one who had become the light she once searched for. And finally, truly, she was home. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.